Okay. Oh, wait. It says it's starting record. Okay. Do you got a notification that says Yuri's recording the call?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we have back on the program our returning champion, Yves Engler. Yves, as everybody should know, is a Canadian historian, media critic, NGO critic, anti-imperialist thinker and activist, co-founder of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and he's the host of his own program, the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, on his YouTube channel. And people should also subscribe to yvesengler.com so that they get all of Yves' latest articles, and so that they get a notification because every Monday Yves does his program, and people really should tune into that. And he is the author, and he's also the author of Canada and Haiti, Waging a War on the Poor Majority, co-written by Anthony Fenton, The Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy, Canada and Africa, 300 Years of Aid and Exploitation, Canada and Israel, Building Apartheid, Lester Pearson's Peacekeeping, The Truth May Hurt, The Ugly Canadian, Stephen Harper's Foreign Policy, A Propaganda System, How Canada's Corporations, Media and Academia, Military, Cell War and Exploitation, Stop Signs, Cars and Capitalism on the Road to Economic, Social, and Ecological Decay, which he co-wrote with his wife, Bianca Mugeni, who's the director of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. Left to Right, Marching to the Beat of Imperial Canada, House of Mirrors, Justin Trudeau's Foreign Policy, and Yves' latest epic book is Stand on Guard for Whom? A People's History of the Canadian Military. Damn, Yves, when's the Haiti book gonna come?
Good question.
All these fantastic books, and anywho, Yves, welcome back to the program, and thanks for coming on such short notice.
Thanks for having me.
Always an honor to have you, so Yves, so I know we're a bit straight for time, so let's get let's get straight to the 4 questions I have prepared. I first wanted I wanted your views on the growing optimism that many leftists have been expressing over the rise of a multipolar world, a possible multipolar world led by the countries called BRICS, so Brazil, South Africa, Russia, China, and India. And if you don't share the optimism that some of our fellow leftists and those in the anti-imperialist world, if you don't share the optimism that they have, then from a critical left perspective, what are your concerns about a multipolar world, but one, of course, led by I want your thoughts, and then I can give my own views on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing that I would say is that I think a multipolar world is a better thing. Obviously, if you're just a really simple example, if you're the Ugandan government and you're looking to, I don't know, maybe build a rail line, and you have the option between China and the World Bank, it's better to have another option. So I think that obviously sort of overwhelming U.S. dominance that has existed certainly since the end of the Cold War, and arguably before that even, that's a good thing. So I also agree with, like, obviously weakening of the U.S. dollar hegemony is a good thing as well. It's totally ridiculous that a lot of trade between Kenya and Uganda takes place in U.S. dollars, right? And I've just at the level of traveling in you bringing U.S. dollars is in lots of parts of the world, that's still the sort of the norm. So things like that, and I think that there's clearly examples. The Financial Times a couple days ago had a piece that said that between 2000 and 2022, Chinese trade with Latin America went from $12 billion to $495 billion. That is an absolutely stunning increase in trade in a pretty short period of time. And that clearly is weakening US dominance in the hemisphere. Brazil's biggest trade partner is China. Obviously, we saw Lula in Beijing. Maybe that's about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and they established the Dilma Rousseff, the former Workers' Party president, is the head of the new bank, the sort of BRICS bank, which is sort of a little bit of a competitor to the World Bank, and so yeah, all that stuff is. I think that stuff is good, weakening U.S. dominance. I mean, if you still look at the whole debate about U.S. dollar, hegemony, and it's still an incredible amount of proportion of global transactions that take place in U.S. dollars. I think it's something like half, and it's down. And I've seen some different numbers. Some say it's not just down, but if you actually look at the drops are increasing. The rate of dropping of the U.S. dollar as the dominant global exchange currency is increasing. So that's good. And obviously, if the less exchange there is taking place in U.S. dollars, the less power U.S. has to sanction countries and to mess up, all the power with that stuff. I think that that's good. I don't, when it comes to some of the stuff with regards to Ukraine and multipolar world, honestly, I believe a lot of that's just Russian government kind of propaganda. I don't think that we're in Ukraine, we're having some it's going to be the defeat of the
Western-led imperialism.
Yeah, the Western-led unipolar world. I think that it's an impossible. That's an issue. It's kind of an impossible. It's you want both sides to lose, right? You want the Russians to lose because they are the aggressor, and then you also want NATO to lose because it's the geopolitical aggressor. So you don't want either side to win. But I don't think that I do think that you can see a scenario, very unlikely, but you can see a scenario where Russia would suffer such a defeat that Russia would be knocked back so far, and that would have implications for China and stuff like that. Yeah, and you got to also ask yourself, you want a multipolar world, but on what conditions, right? You don't want a multipolar world with incredible amounts of killing that leads to a multipolar world. That's not a step forward for.
And also, if I can interject very quickly, I mean, my criticism of people having way too much rose-tinted glasses when it comes to these countries, BRICS leading this supposed multipolar world, which many people think is going to usher in advancements in socialism or leftism, is first of all, Brazil. I mean, BRICS is only happening because Lula and Dilma before are interested in BRICS. When it was Bolsonaro, he wanted to be aligned with Anglo-American, Canadian, world order, and Brazil still has a lot of huge, inequalities, class inequalities, racial inequalities, and Canadians who wants an end to settler colonialism in Canada. There still is a lot of that going on in Brazil. South Africa, even I like the South African government's pretty anti-imperial foreign policy, but this still is a government, the ANC, which these are the black misleadership class who are fine with letting mining companies, mostly international mining companies, but also domestic South African mining companies, massacre workers who who want to go on strike and are asking for just a decent wage or just basic hey, can our wages keep up with, inflation and the rise of of productivity? Then you have Russia, which, although there's a lot of propaganda on Russia, and I'm starting to and I'm reading, and it's starting to get more and more difficult to find out where do the half truths start and where does just the full on propaganda begin when it comes to Russia. But although Putin certainly is not like Yeltsin, he's not totally a complete reactionary market fundamentalist, but still, Russia under him, it still is very much a fiscally conservative country, and and also socially conservative country, which is the other problem with Brazil, India, and
less Brazil, but yeah, maybe India, and yeah.
And then of course you have India, which still has its problems with the caste system, with its with its pretty grotesque approach to capitalism with Indian characteristics. Even though Modi, depending on his mood, also tries to not be totally in line with with Anglo-American empire. And so those are just my my left criticisms when it comes to when it comes to BRICS. And then when it comes to China, I certainly don't suffer from the anti-China derangement syndrome I used to have, and I do, and nowadays I actually do go out of my way to defend China against a lot of the, I think, false accusations that they're a rival capitalist or that they're a rival imperialist. But there are still some problems I find with China's approach to international relations, because what China's doing in Africa is also mining, is also building of roads for like the cars and stuff like that. I don't see the Chinese government pushing eco-socialism with Chinese characteristics, if you know what I mean. That's why I think the working class and those who do want socialism do have to, they shouldn't be under any illusions, and they should still be struggling within those respective countries, and then globally when it comes to solidarity building to truly usher in hopefully a new era of socialism, especially when we talk about the climate crisis. But anyways,
I think
those are just my criticisms.
Another thing I would add to the discussion. First of all, BRICS is not. There's no even pretense that it's like a socialistic, alliance. Unlike something like the ALBA, the Venezuelan-led alliance of the Bolivarian alliance. That's one thing. Another thing, I think that to me, a lot of this stuff is sort of like you can have an opinion about it. But I don't really see like what can a leftist Canadian really do to like bring in a multipolar world, So I kind of always want to wonder a little bit. I feel like there's like a lot of it can be a diversion of political energy away from like actually sort of challenging very specific Canadian policies. So I have sort of like my opinion that I obviously believe, I mean, if you believe in human equality, obviously China and India should be the two most powerful countries in the world. I don't see how you can get around that, right? Like obviously a country of 340 million people, the US, shouldn't be the most powerful country in the world if it's not even close, right? So that seems pretty elementary to me. But I don't know how useful a lot of the discussion of Canadian or American leftists in sort of focusing on that, how useful it is, because I don't really see how exactly.
Meaning you think there's a little bit too much focus on the concept or even the possibility of multipolarism, and not enough American leftists, for example, devoting their energies to dismantling settler colonialism and indigenous justice.
What can we do? What can we really do to bring it about? Like, is there some project that's being presented that if we do this, it's going to bring multipolarity? Is that, or like I think there is, in one sense, is the project of like lessening Canadian imperialism that has, but I find that some of it becomes kind of a little bit sort of like abstract and becomes a little bit of just like, yeah, you used the word rose-colored glasses, I think, but like it becomes like we just sort of wish this different world, but those dynamics that are changing it mostly don't have anything to do with us. They have to do with like dynamics within, primarily obviously within Chinese political and economic life. That is far and away the most substantive dynamic, and that's because I think that I'm far from any sort of expert on China's development, but basically it's a country that spent quite a long period basically developing a cohesive political nationalistic, they call it communist, but sort of something between nationalistic and communist governmental political structure. And then they, at a certain point, they decided to very much open up and basically pull in foreign expertise, pull in a certain amount of foreign capital, use it where it was helpful, and abuse it where it wasn't. I mean, it was kind of a sensible nationalistic development strategy of exploiting, I mean, everything from formal theft of intellectual property to the more just bringing in companies and demanding they work with local companies, and then gradually the technology was developed by the local companies, and then marginalizing the foreign companies. I mean, that's part of one element in the sort of anti-China rise in recent
exactly
years.
They're not they're not being an obedient victim of globalization like the Philippines or Indonesia, or even to a degree South Korea.
Yeah, they I would say they never have been, but they've become increasingly confident and increasingly assertive in sort of saying, hey, now we're getting to the point where we can start having numbers about like Chinese export of vehicles. I saw something, China's on the cusp of passing Japan as the biggest exporter of cars, which is
not good for the not good. Exactly.
There's all kinds of downsides to that, but from a strictly sort of like quote unquote development standpoint, that's a pretty important, has been historically a pretty important indicator in that getting companies like Huawei, which are leading in an important area of tech. I think that some of that multipolarity kind of discussion gets us a little bit away from kind of like what can we do, and what's the most important like politically to focus our attention on, which is mostly about how Canada, or I guess depending where you are, how they're contributing to the unjust global order.
That that will be to be continued, and that's a subject that we should definitely explore more in the future, both on your program and on and on this show. And I wanted your response. That's actually a perfect segue actually to this question, because you like me, you don't support Russia's military actions in Ukraine, but of course you understand why at least the Russians felt that they had to respond militarily to Ukraine, to the Western-backed Ukrainian government and all the civil war that was happening in eastern Ukraine. I wanted your response very briefly before we get to these last two questions then. which is, my friend Boyan Stanislavski of the Barricade, a pan-Eastern European left-wing news outlet, which I'm often, invited on to speak on the last, several times, on the program, and the last, and the last show I did with them last year. Boyan has talked a lot about how he thinks Ukraine will be partitioned into either 2 or 3 countries, in which you have Western Ukraine, of course with Kiev as the capital, being aligned with NATO, the European Union, and and whatnot, and then Eastern Ukraine, which is where the civil war and where Russia's military actions are taking place. That will either be partitioned into 2 or 3 countries. So you'll have the Donetsk region being an independent country, or they might like Crimea vote to join the Russian Federation, and same with Luhansk will either be an independent country or also join the Russian Federation, and it'll be recognized either way by Russia, much of Asia, much of Latin America, and much of and much of Africa. And this will be the tragedy of all this will be because of Western meddling in Ukraine. I think dating back to the Cold War, but certainly it all really began with that 2014 coup and all and all that stuff. And I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, the Russian government has already, they've declared the 4 oblasts as like part of Russia, right? So I just saw a story saying they've given 1.5 million passports out over the past year, or however long it is they've been giving out the passports to people in the East. They right now, I think they have something just above around 18% of what was Ukrainian territory pre-2014. And I know in John Mersheimer's recent talk, he said he was talking to somebody who's like pretty tight in Kremlin circles, and they were saying that their hope is, their plan is, if they can do it militarily, is to take, there's 4 other oblasts they want to take, the adjacent oblasts, and that obviously the dilemma for Moscow on that is, of course, you want to have as much Ukrainian territory with as few I don't know, call them nationalists, call them Western aligned, non-ethnic Russians, non-Russian speaking, whatever, however you want to call that exactly. So you want as much Ukrainian land with people who are sort of okay, whether they are supportive of Russia or not, but are less hostile to Russia. So that makes sense to me. I know at one point there was the plan was all the way going.
So very briefly, So is that why you do believe in the argument that this is a inter-imperialist conflict?
Oh, I don't think that was the objective of Russia at the start. I think Russia's primary objective would have just no NATO. If they would have got a no NATO commitment, that would have led to this not happening. There are other elements, obviously the sort of internal civil war within Ukraine / low-level proxy war that was already going on for many years. Obviously, that was also an important part. But I think that the primary thing from Russia's perspective was Ukraine is not going to join NATO. It's not going to be a bulwark of military hostility right in the sort of heart of Russia's sort of geostrategic kind of security domain. But that just because that was that would have been agreed to beforehand, or that would have avoided a war beforehand, doesn't mean that that's going to be enough now, right? And obviously, if you look at what's happened, I mean, God, how much death and destruction there's been on both sides.
Yeah.
And so obviously, Russia's not going to just walk away. I mean, they've conquered this territory. They're not just going to walk away. I mean, I don't, they might. I think there's still a small, there's still a chance they could get defeated and could get driven out, a lot of it. But I think that's unlikely. But that still could happen. But yeah. So the more likely scenario, I don't know the military stuff very well. I don't know the geography that well. I don't know, right? So this is very speculative on my part, but my impression is the most likely scenario is that Russia continues to sort of make gradual gains, and how far that goes, and when there is finally some sort of like, truce and peace negotiations. I don't know, but that my guess is that Russia gradually continues to make gains. Its economy has done pretty well. It's not been destroyed. Ukraine's economy has been, very much undermined.
Yeah, and Zelensky's gone on a privatization shopping spree since the war, and also, so yeah, exactly. But yeah, but yeah, if Ukraine really will become permanently, damaged, and it does become, partitioned to, two countries, that I just think that's a huge tragedy. But again, people will have to recognize that unfortunate set of events, if that's the solution to this war, civil war, and also conflict with Russia, again, people have to realize that, again, I blame, NATO and Western imperialism for that. So, but yeah, and then, just before I get to this last question, I just wanted your response. What has been the response to some of your articles? You criticized an Indigenous Professor Sidney Blackstock for not speaking up for the Indigenous Palestinians. You also called out a student friend of yours during your student activism days, who's a liberal MP, for a lot of his imperialism and his de facto support for the pivot to Asia, and also criticized this recent elected NDP, Ontario local NDP, who tweeted something in solidarity for the Palestinians, but then later quickly apologized because B'nai B'rith and the ultra Zionists got on her. And I'm just curious, have any of them responded to your articles?
I haven't had any of the individuals, like Samir Zuberi didn't respond, who I was on the Concordia Student Union with. Cindy Blackstock didn't respond. I've gotten criticisms from different people, different places. Somebody criticized me. I'm forgetting a sort of leftist academic in Vancouver criticized me for challenging on the Cindy Blackstock piece. I had some people, I had actually one of the other executive members of the Concordia Student Union really attacked me, got very angry on Facebook about me criticizing Samir Zuberi. And then he kind of had then he basically apologized, and then he actually made a donation to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute as part of his sort of apologizing for getting so angry.
Okay, interesting.
I had some people in the kind of like the Muslim activist kind of world that got angry about the Samir Zuberi piece. So with the B'nai B'rith and Sarah Jama,
yes, that's yeah.
I think mostly had. I think it. Everyone hates B'nai B'rith at this point, right? Like anyone who's like in at all in the sort of progressive-ish kind of world, they all think that's a basically a hate organization. So yeah, I mean, I don't.
But she herself, or a representative, has not, reached out to.
I wouldn't have expected that. They just wanted it all to go away. They don't want this to continue. They just want it to go away. And so So, I think from her standpoint, she would just see this as like, me getting involved in this is not a good thing, from the standpoint of like having the future, the NDP doing something again and something similar in the future. I think that it's imperative that we have as much kind of like pushback and as much if the reason why they concede so quickly to B'nai B'rith is because they're scared of having a big brouhaha from B'nai B'rith, and so they have to be scared about a brouhaha from the other side if they're so. But yeah, I mean, I think that like in all of this, to me, it's like if you're not angering people, like sort of like what are you doing? I mean, I think that there's a bit of a distinction between some activism, which is about, I think activism, a lot of it has to be about kind of like coalition building and personal relationships and stuff like that. But commentary, when you're living in a world of swimming of injustice, like, I mean, you have to be angry. Like if there's not a sort of angry reactions to what you're doing, it means you're aligning too much with power, right? So,
and also challenging the complicity, which by and large a lot of the left and left-leaning folk are complicit, if not total indifference to the suffering of those overseas due to Canadian imperialism, just straight up, just not even engaging in the issues. And for me, it kind of goes back to why I challenge more. Well, not challenge more. I simply ask any Americans that come on the program, what's it going to take for the U.S. left to show more solidarity to the plight of Indigenous people? Because for me, it's like, how can we have such a big movement for Black Lives Matter, Latinx Lives Matter, workers' movement, anti-imperialism, Palestine justice, and we say we want to vanquish white supremacy and capitalism and stuff like that, and yet we're not engaging in the most marginalized, oppressed group, which are the Indigenous people, and there's just a lot of either complicity of just not engaging in it, or just indifference to it. So you have to you do have to challenge fellow comrades and the society at large when it's like, come on, what kind of an anti-racist, anti-war folk are you if you're not showing solidarity to Indigenous people? And I think that's kind of what you're doing with the anti-imperialist movement, a much-needed anti-imperialist movement in Canada, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's I don't, certainly politicians. I mean, like, Samir Zuberi, he's a Liberal MP. I mean, it's bananas, quite frankly, to think that he's not to be good at, like, we can't, right? Like, it's just totally bananas. Like, so I get that there's people who have like had some personal relationships with him who react, kind of like frame this from the lens of friendship rather than frame it from the lens of politics, but, and I also understand that, Cindy Blackstock is somebody who has done a lot of good stuff for Indigenous children in Canada. But she is a political figure that has a pretty important standing. And the fact that she's just, well, first of all, that she sits on the board of Irwin Cotler's, liberal imperialist think tank, and then also has just been completely silent on this incredibly outrageous attacks by the McGill administration, where she teaches and where she has received a whole bunch of awards recently. She's totally silent on these like outrageously anti-democratic, anti-Palestinian attacks against the student union. I mean, I think that needs to be pointed out, and I get it that there's like, it's not, like, some people aren't going to love me for pointing that stuff out, but
also like lots and also not just Palestinians, but lots of Indigenous people, whether it's in Brazil, Chile, Peru, and elsewhere, are also being oppressed by yours truly, Canadian mining companies, the very people she's she's fighting on the home front in Canada. That's happening overseas, and that's why. And I'm still baffled to why why more Black Lives Matter in Canada don't speak out against the anti-Black racism that happens overseas, not least Africa and yours truly, Haiti.
Yes, no, for sure. I mean, even beyond the mining is a very obvious example where Canadian mining companies are destroying indigenous communities in all kinds of places. But even at the broader level, like the overthrowing the government in Bolivia, the Canada's rule in 2019, and not just ousting a government, but ousting the government first ever elected indigenous leader in Bolivia. And so yeah, to just sort of stand aside when it comes to Canadian foreign policy or Canadian imperialism is a big political concession right there. And then if you delve into it even closer, you find that there's even more kind of complicity. Yeah.
Well, I have to let you. I have to let you go. It's actually time for you to go, so we don't have time for this one question. But
we can do the final question quickly. I'll do the final question quickly, and I take Joshua to the park. So.
Okay, sure. Okay. Well, thank you then. Well, then the last question I wanted to ask you, and this kind of actually is a perfect, one to kind of wrap everything up that we've been talking about, which is. Explain your ethos that should be adopted in international affairs, which should be the global reset to end imperialism and start radically under goodwill, which is the first do no harm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. That's a big question, so I don't know. I'll bite off some of that. I mean, in the left-right book, I put forward the idea of first do no harm, from the medical world, and I think that is important because all of the political ethos in Canada is do more, right? From the the militarists at the whatever end who want to bomb Libya or join the war in Afghanistan or join the Iraq war or put more money into more weapons to the NATO proxy war. To the kind of NGO world of we need more Canadian development and aid and democracy promotion and Haiti is the clearest example where that was just to put it very crassly, just a cover for naked imperialism and democracy promotion to overthrow the most popular politician in the history of Haiti, right? So with the 2004 coup against Aristide, so that is and even in instances where you get into this there's some I don't think all aid is bad, right? I think there are lots and lots of aid projects that are good. They do, if you look at them narrowly, you go build a school somewhere that has a good. There is some kids that get to go to school in either weren't getting to go to school or get to go to school in a better facility that weren't doing that, prior to this school being built. But the aid is tied to broader political objectives, and generally those political objectives are about maintaining power imbalances and maintaining periphery countries like Haiti or different countries in Africa or Central America, etc. So the ethos we need to also challenge, sort of at the sort of rhetorical level of this kind of do more kind of ideology in Canada that even when in some instances does have some utility to it, has some positive that comes out of it, it's tied into kind of a broader political dynamic that's destructive. Now, so that's one thing that I put forward. I mean, there's all kinds of you get into a simple principles, of course, treat others how you would want to be treated yourself, right? So if you believe that there should be a public education system, don't go to Haiti and say, hey, we're going to set up private schools that are going to be run by little charities and churches and that kind of Like if you don't want that type of system in Canada, then why would you really be promoting that elsewhere? And you can, there's a counter argument. They could say, well, there's no option of a public system. You can get into counter arguments, and you could say, okay, we're going to build a school, and we're going to hand over the power, like, the control to the local community in the context of the whole thing being moved towards being run by a public system, right? You could do things that may be counter to the ideology, but that you say and you promote it to go in a different kind of way. So, but anyway, but broader, another part. So we want to treat others how we would want to be treated ourselves, which is a pretty basic moral principle. But also there's some broader things like the equity questions, right?
Let's see, there's a lot of commotion going on.
It's in the background. And the broader equity questions, like in Canada, we have transfer payments. Okay, so the wealthier provinces transfer money to the poorer provinces, and the idea is that you want to lessen the internal inequality, and there's no reason why something like that couldn't be, adopted globally, right? So I'm not against aid. I'm supportive. I'm against aid as it's currently formulated as mostly a tool of geopolitical control, but I'm not against aid, right? In fact, I would be, I think there's probably should be more aid, but within a kind of a structure that's not about reinforcing inequities, but rather, or power imbalances, but rather undermine those power imbalances.
Exactly. And then also, I'll try to be very brief about it. But when you have people who protest against the current Islamic Republic of Iran, or people who people who criticize Vladimir Putin and his policies, or even those who criticize, or even those who supported the ouster of Mobutu, in my mom's country of the Congo. Well, the reason why all of that stuff exists is because of imperialism to begin with. Had the West not completely demolished Russia the way they did after the Cold War, with Yeltsin, we would not have had, a Putin. If the West had not been supporting the Shah all those years, we would not have had, the nasty backlash in the form of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And then the same goes for, Mobutu, a puppet of, the West, and then later this greater evil of supporting, Rwanda, and, and a new puppet gets installed, Kabila. And then that's the same when we talk about, so many of these countries, Saddam Hussein.
And I think another part, like the Iran example, is clear to me. I mean, I of course don't support.
And that's where we go to the first do no harm, which is okay. Now that all this mess has been made, let's at least start with basic international relations, which is, stop meddling in my country's affairs. You respect my sovereignty, we respect your sovereignty, and if there are issues to be dealt with, let's do it diplomatically with cultural exchanges and whatnot. So.
Yeah, that's overwhelming. Just two things on that. One thing is that, with regards to Iran, okay, I obviously do not believe in state-imposed veiling of women. Of course, that's not something that I believe in. Now, so if I were in Iran, I would think that it was a good thing to be protesting that patriarchy and that oppression. That doesn't then translate to me thinking that that's something that's necessarily important to be doing in Canada, right? That's a distinction that I find sometimes it's kind of stunning to me that people don't seem to see that, but it seems pretty obvious to me that you protest, and how your protests are translate politically, where they're taking place is of central importance. And so when you have a situation like Iran, where there has been this, campaign that I consider illegitimate of trying to undermine the Iranian government because they don't like the Iranian government's geopolitics primarily, but some other dynamics. Then protesting about Iran's repressive, patriarchal veil policy in Canada feeds into that broader illegitimate, in my eyes, politically illegitimate campaign that Canada has been waging against Iran and there's many phases to it. Okay, so that's I think of kind of important. The other part to it is losing my train of thought on what the other the point I wanted to make with regards to the
also, the people, the well-meaning folks, because there are some well-meaning folks both in Iran and in the diaspora community who want end to the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's not what I mean. Okay, most of it's backed by the West. So in other words, if the Islamic Republic of of Iran was to be overthrown, the people who are going to be in charge are people who are not going to be working for the benefit of the people. It's going to be another puppets of the West. And okay, maybe it might have a secular flavor to it, but for me it's just like, can we just stop with the imperialism?
Yeah. I mean, I get like an Iranian diaspora member who doesn't like the government and thinks that they're
not going to like the MEK.
yeah, there's some of that dynamic, but there's people who I think more politically sophisticated and progressive who would be saying, well, yeah, we don't believe that the U.S. has the right intentions, but we think that there's going to be some way in which we can kind of use this Western pressure to sort of oust the government and then step in there and have a more progressive society. I think there are people who believe that. Personally, I'm very doubtful of that happening.
Very wrong-headed.
That would play out. Much more likely is if you look at what has happened with U.S. regime changes in the region, you'll find that it leads to like total disaster. So there's some, and I think there's you see some of that with Ukraine right now, right? There's like clearly a faction of Ukrainian. There's clearly a faction of like hardline nationalists who basically, okay, we're going to use NATO. Yeah, it's going to lead. We're in this conflict with Russia and it's very damaging, but we're going to use this to sort of build this real Ukrainian nationalism and finally be independent from the Russia and it's going to go through a tough time and it's brutal right now, but it will come out at the end and it's going to be a glorious Ukrainian society. It's clearly people who believe that. I think that it's possible, and I don't think that's like an impossibility. I think more likely is you're going to lose a quarter of your country and the rest of it's going to be a dysfunctional mess that Russia's going to keep bombing whenever the hell it wants to bomb. That's more likely, I think, as the scenario. But I get that there are your people are playing that, but I don't think that, like from a Canadian perspective, I don't know that what I think needs to be focused on in the dynamics are slightly different with regards to Ukraine and Iran, but the broad is that is this really up to us? Is this really up to the Canadian government to get meddling in those affairs? But I just thought I remembered the other point that I did want to make, and I really should go after this. But this is also the whole question of international solidarity is a complicated question, where my overwhelming political ethos is that there's more than enough of Canada doing pretty obviously self-interested, elite-driven, empire-focused, capitalist-focused international policies, so that I'll just spend my time challenging those rather than doing some form of like what we'll call a more like concrete international solidarity of like that movement taking place there. Okay. Now, having said that, I do have a personal experience where that I think one somewhat important personal experience where that international solidarity did matter. So that in 2012, with the student strike in Quebec, which I participated in lots of the protests and obviously followed very closely. I saw how the dynamic of Chilean students sort of, talking about, writing statements about wearing the red square, how that gave energy to the protests in Montreal, Quebec. I saw how, some of that with some of the European French student federations, some of it getting into the US cultural domain, and how that, amplified the protests. So, and I think that was really healthy. That was good. That was like, and you could argue that was a form of like foreign interference in Canadian affairs, right? Like you could argue that this is right. And so there are some like unclear lines, tricky lines of like, how do you actually navigate it? My personal disposition is not to be, even if I think there is some union in Hong Kong that is actually, a socialist minded union that's trying to figure out some like working class politic outside of the geopolitical game going on between Washington and Beijing. My inclination is like, okay, it's just too, it's too muddy. The territory is too muddy, and there's so many more than enough other forms of political interventions. I'm not going to get involved in that one because I don't want to maybe contribute to this sort of destabilization, demonization campaign. But having said that, I do understand that there is a role for that, and that in some dynamics, some political moments, that can be valuable. So I don't know exactly the correct answer to all that, but yeah. So I think but overwhelmingly, I think we should focus on the do no harm and restraining Canada's role. But
we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Yves Engler, folks. Subscribe to www.yvesengler.com so that you can get all of Yves' latest articles. Check out the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, which if you go on the website, you can subscribe and be an audience participant, asking questions. Until then, Yves, thank you so much for your time. You give all my best to little Joshua, little Youri, and Bianca, and looking forward to hopefully having you back on the program soon for our shitting on candidates special. But until then, all my best, and thanks for coming on the program.